Welcome to the Agency Insider podcast. I am Navneet Kaushal, and today we have an exciting guest, Brian Kato, the founder of Fusion Wine and an expert in SEO. Brian has been transforming the way businesses approaches digital marketing with his innovative strategies. We are thrilled to dive into his journey, insights on SEO, and the future of digital marketing. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thank you for having me on your podcast.
Let's start with your journey. You began in web development and even had a stint as a musician before diving into SEO. Can you tell us about that transition and what actually drove you to the SEO?
Yeah, so I was doing music and was actually a touring musician for about 15 years. We were signed to an independent record label for a little while, but did a lot of stuff on like kind of boots on the ground, living in a van with other individuals and touring around for weeks on end. But the big thing that I learned from that was number one, we had to do all of our own marketing material. Obviously, in the entertainment industry, it's a little bit brutal. You've got to be very, very sharp and very focused on what you're doing. I also got into a lot of guerrilla marketing strategies. So I've been asked what is that? And so one of the things that we had done was before a lot of shows, we would go out and we would kind of mingle with the crowd, before doors at a venue would open. We would actually go out and it was like, hi, my name is Brian. I'm the singer from such and such band. By the way, here, listen to this iPod. Here's us, on Spotify. Here's us on, different music channels. By the way, we're opening. And so we got very very innovative with some of our strategies, more so than just, come like our page, right? We got to be we had to be very strategic in our approach. So I did that for about 15 years, got into web development and actually had gone to college for business administration. And from there found out that I'm really good at like database design. Again, that really lends itself also to the back end development, and then having a front end aesthetic with obviously designing flyers, things like that for music. So kind of full stack, if you will. And then, after I had my son, it was kind of I don't want to be touring around for 4 to 6 weeks on end away from my family. And so kind of stepped away from music, at least the touring component of that, and I really dove into kind of web design. I was a manager for a granite company for a while, and then got brought in as a project manager, and it morphed into or a project manager for a marketing company. Then that kind of morphed into being the head of SEO, head of paid search at the same time. So I'm wearing like 3 hats all at the same time. And did that for about just under 5 years before I started my own agency. And here we are today.
Wow, that's quite a different journey than I usually hear with my guests,
Right.
honestly. Right. Now, and what inspired you to start Fusion Wine? And honestly, what does Fusion Wine means?
So Fusion Vine was just, it was a name that I came up with. Just, we combine a lot of different elements when it comes to digital marketing. Again, kind of taking that guerrilla marketing approach. We do a lot of things that you might consider more aggressive or potentially fringe or things like that. But we also, combine different elements. I mean, you've got to, as the marketing industry is today, you have to be able to combine, content. You have to be able to integrate, link building, be innovative, capture your audience. You've got to consider things like CRO, conversions, all of these things like that. And I think long gone are the days of like just being an agency that focuses on like just one vertical or just one thing. In a lot of ways, SEO has kind of gotten to the point where unless you're able to captivate the audience and unless you're able to bring them in and be a solution for them, unless you're super niche down and boutique with it, SEO in general is kind of becoming a little bit of a commodity. And so that's why in general, like we actually don't sell SEO per se. It's a tool in our toolbox that we'll leverage, but we do a lot of these other things like brand building, strategic design, brand voice, sometimes PR. We've even done things like physical, like billboard signs, things like that. So it goes beyond just we're a digital marketing company or we do one thing. We actually help build brands.
And so I'm sure there would have been some initial challenges. So, I mean, can you tell us about the transition and the initial challenges you faced when you founded Fusion Wine?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for a lot of, and especially for a lot of entrepreneurs, the biggest challenge is going to be like understanding that business acumen, right? A lot of people that I've met, and even in speaking over the last year, 2 years at digital marketing conferences, I find that there are some just absolutely intelligent people, but a lot of them lack like basic business sense, right? Knowing what their floor is, right? Knowing what break even points or profitability, margins, things like that. And I see a lot of people that tend to race to the bottom of like, hey, we have the cheapest, or we have, this is our unique selling proposition. This is our, offer, without fully knowing like what are the financial implications, or what are the business implications of making those kinds of decisions, right? We could all say that, hey, the first next 10 people get 50% off, but 50% off on those people, I've now got to do twice as much volume potentially to even break even, or in a lot of cases it's actually more than twice as much, because you have the sunk costs of advertising, marketing, all of that. So it's not just a what's the money coming in. You have to consider all of those other elements that
Right,
actually are a part of the marketing.
right, right. Let's talk about SEO strategies and testing a bit. Of course, love doing testings and automation. So we're gonna dive deep into that
Sure.
as well. So why do you believe testing is crucial in SEO? And can you share some innovative testing methods you have used?
Yeah. So if you're not testing, you're really doing your clients a disservice. And the reason is that it's constantly changing. And so just for clarity, like I don't believe that you should ever do stuff directly to a client if it's not like if you're not actually testing and understanding what works and what doesn't. I find it a little bit unethical to do that to a client, even if you're talking like white hat,
Okay.
very content strategies, because you could potentially do a content strategy that ends up backfiring, right? Guest posting, for example, for a long time that was guest posting and doing things like that. It was well, Google's okay with it until your backlink profile predominantly shows guest posting, and then they're like, actually, we don't really like that so much, right? It's not natural, it's not journalistic in nature, because now you're just paying for placement. And so that's enter the rel equals UGC, rel equals sponsored, that Google had to start clamping down on that. And now that goes from a very white hat, which everyone was like raving about, like, oh, guest posts are great. They still are a great way to move the needle, but now it goes from a white hat to a maybe it's a gray hat area that Google doesn't really care for per se. And
Right.
so I think that that's one of the things that when you're testing, you do need to be aware of. And, even when we're looking at things like rel equals UGC, rel equals sponsored, those kinds of things, does it really matter? Right. And so those are the kinds of things that, if you're testing and actually digging deep into, you're going to understand it with a lot more clarity about what's actually working and what's actually not. The methodology, so the second part of your question, the methodology behind that is it just shocks me to see how many SEOs don't actually have a test website. Personally, we have a handful of them. Can't go into too many details about that, obviously, because they are test sites, and we do keep that pretty guarded. But I mean, it just shocks me to see how so many people are working in SEO and they're saying, hey, this works and this, but they don't have an actual test site that they can try to burn it to the ground, right? See what actually works, and what, if we're told you have to put this on your website, if you have to do something, like, do you actually have to do it, or is it best practice, or what's the actual effect of not doing it? Right. So understanding that you have these test sites that you can actually push the limit on, see what works, what doesn't, what's actively working. And yeah, like that kind of R&D is really, really important to stay on top of your game.
Okay. Now, how do you conduct SEO testing, and what are the most important metrics you focus on? I'm sure they were different, maybe a couple of years
Yeah.
back. They've changed now. So,
Yeah. A couple things that I look at, I used to do a lot of single variable. Unfortunately, single variable doesn't work in today's environment,
okay,
because single variable, will start to tell you whether or not there's like something can potentially move it. But from there, what I tend to look at is let's actually put it into the wild and see, because as you and I both know, like there are more than one ways to get to the top of search engines, right? It could be a backlink play, it could be content play, it could
Right.
be CTR in traffic, right?
Right.
There's a lot of different ways that you can get there, and understanding what's the most effective minimum viable methodology versus having to, just do content and content and content, you know, without any backlinks, like that's a whole different strategy, and you have to play that differently than you would if it was content and backlinks or content and PR or ads or things like that. So for me, we'll initially start with saying, if we are running like a single variable, does it even work? But then we actually have to go through a secondary methodology where it's, let's actually take a look at what's working. And then when we put it actually into a live environment where we can test it on some of these test sites that we have, does it actually work still at that point? Or are we dealing with something that works in a vacuum, but then once you release it into a live environment, it falls on its face?
Okay. What are the biggest challenges you faced while testing SEO strategy? I know one you said is, of course, it works in vacuum, but it falls otherwise. But are there other challenges you face, and how do you actually go about overcoming them or making those tests successful?
So the biggest thing right now that I'm seeing with a lot of stuff is brand. And if you're not branded, and this is an issue that I've seen with HCU and a lot of things like that. But if you're not branded, Google doesn't really take you seriously. And so that's probably the biggest challenge, is like, even with a test site, how do we build brand around something, right, that doesn't possibly exist? And so that's probably the biggest challenge that I see. There are different ways you can go about doing it. And a lot of it really comes down to, treat it like an actual website. I've seen guys that, try and spin up test websites, and again, without brand, it's going to kind of fall on its face. But if you actually have some branded signals, if you actually treat it like a business would, which goes again into time and money, if you treat it as a brand, you're going to get a lot better results, and it's going to be a more accurate depiction of what you can expect online.
Okay, so the most common question which we come across, how do you, when you are starting a business, how do you build a brand in the eyes of Google? So do you come across these situations when a new client who is like just launched his business, and now whatever you and me say, eventually he's not a brand. So that means, will those new businesses never win in Google?
No, absolutely not. And so they can win in Google. The thing is that they need to establish who they are, what they do, and where they do it. And that's a quote from, a friend of mine, Mike Merlino. He always is like, brand, 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 right? Who you are, what you do, where you do it. And those are, if you can satisfy those kinds of things, you can actually be seen as a legitimate brand in the eyes of Google, right? Even if you are, I mean, take for example a local business, right? Your Jim's Plumbing, that, so who you are, what do you do? Well, we provide plumbing services. And where do you do it? Chicago, Illinois, right?
Right.
So now you've satisfied all of those things, and you can start building upon that at a local level. If we're talking national, we're PepsiCo, or the PepsiCo company, right? So what do you do? We're Pepsi. What do you do? What service do you provide? Beverages and soft drinks, right? Where do you do it? Globally, right? So a lot of people think that like it's a really difficult challenge to go from like local, or is it national, or whatever. Location is relative, right? Are you
Okay.
are you local to your city, your neighborhood, country,
Right.
the Milky Way galaxy, right? If we're
Right.
talking interstellar,
Right.
but it's all relative. So understanding and kind of painting that picture for Google on who you are, what you do, where you do it, and understanding how your brand fits into that, that's a really important factor. And that's kind of how we tend to approach it. I would also add to that, typically, if we're starting from ground zero with a client, that's where I want to look at, how brandable is the name. If it's something that's super common that we're going to be, let's say I had a product called, Amazon streaming, right? Good luck trying to rank that. It's
Right.
not going to happen. because you have conflicting brands with someone like Amazon, that you're going to go up against, and you're never going to outperform that. So from a strategy perspective, that's where I would tend to look at how brandable is the name. Is it something that we can potentially look at and think of contingency planning, right? If we were to call the business, Navneet's SEO company, well, if you ever step out of that, well, that starts to feel a little bit weird now, right? Where your brand page traffic, that makes a lot of sense because either with you or without you involved in it, it's still brandable. You can switch things out very easily, but again, it's all about the brand.
Right. Now, can you share some insights from your recent SEO test that led to significant client?
Yeah. So one of them that we recently did, again, with brand, is that we ended up having close to a 400% increase in traffic within 6 months.
Wow.
And a lot of it was just who they are, what they do, where they do it. And this was in a larger metro area, but a lot of it came down to understanding those foundational components. Obviously, good on-page SEO, off-page signals. We did a lot of social. A lot of people sleep on social, but having all of these signals kind of combined together, you're going to get a considerably better result than you would with just doing on page or just doing off page, just doing ads, right? Having these combined signals, you can amplify what you're doing.
Right. Now, also, I'm sure these are just brand signals, but are there some effective link building techniques you have found successful over the years, which still works?
Ads are really important. If you're an SEO company and you're not at least doing branded ads for your client, that's a huge miss. Like you have to, even if it's just very small amounts of ad budget, you have to be doing that. There's other kinds of link building that we've done. We've done everything from, like I was saying, guest posting, content. I'm a big fan of creating my own content and creating linkable assets. So whether that's PDFs, documents, spreadsheets, Google Business posts, things like that, where we're able to actually go in and create the content and create linkable assets that then we can share out to other places, share out to additional people. I'm a big fan of syndication. So syndication and automation, right? I don't think that that's any secret to anyone. I use that. I use a lot of stacking methods. A lot of those tend to be very effective because you're building an asset that then people can link out to, and it's good for PR. Brand kits, that's another thing that we've done for a lot of really successful link building. We'll do a brand kit, put that on the web page. It also becomes an entity hub for people to link to and for journalists.
Right. Okay. Now, and of course, there's been too many algorithm changes. So in Google in recent year, of course, how do you adapt to constant algorithm changes, and how should others do the same to maintain their rankings?
I actually don't worry about algorithm updates, believe it or not. I don't. The thing that we tend to look at is because we're doing all of the things and at a foundational level, we're already doing stuff that Google likes, right? We're creating content, we're establishing brand, we're establishing brand authority. And when content comes out, we're not trying to exploit any single tactic. We're using all of these methods, all of the tactics, do all the things. And based on that, we really haven't had to worry about a lot of algorithm updates.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit automation. Of course, how does SEO process automation benefits agencies and clients? And can you share some examples successful examples from your work?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that I would say for automation right now is social amplification of any of your content, right? So if you have a blog, you can automate sending out that blog to, and this is where syndication and things like that come in, right? But you can take any of that content, you can syndicate it out to your various platforms. And there's a lot of tools. I mean, Make is probably one of my favorites right now, just because I like the visual aesthetic of it. It's unlike a lot of other ones like Zapier or Pabbly or some of these others. Make will actually tell you where your automation has failed. So if, let's say, you're going from a blog to reposting it out to Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, A lot of times with Zapier, it'll just say, hey, it didn't work or it failed. Whereas
Mhm.
Make becomes very visual, like on the particular node, it'll tell you this is where the problem exists and this is why it failed and what's going on. So you can troubleshoot things a lot more visually rather than just having to dig through a lot of the code. But social is probably one of the biggest things that we automate almost all of, because if we have a blog, we want to amplify that, and we're going to do that through social
Right.
signals. I think AI has also helped that quite a bit when it comes to automation. I was just at a event in Chicago, and one of the things that we talked about was artificial intelligence and the way that you can
Yeah,
leverage.
yeah, I think, right.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And so
saw.
that was a lot of fun. But using AI to enhance what you're currently doing, and if you're in using AI, if you're using it to shortcut a lot of the actual content
Mhm.
creation, the research, things like that, it allows you to then humanize it. And I'm not an advocate for just like push button AI where you push it and then just post like crazy. You still need to have that human edit, that human touch, just to make sure, like, as with AI, as with any AI, like sometimes it goes off guardrails and you're like, whoa, let's wrangle it back in. Let's get you back into the what we actually want you to do. But it allows you to shortcut and at the end of the day become more profitable as an agency versus spending all of your time on the grunt work that you don't necessarily need to be involved with. It also allows you to have deeper and richer client interactions or potentially scale operations.
Okay. And what are your favorite tools for automating SEO processes?
So SEO processes, a lot of ours, we initially start with a video. So I'll actually physically do the process.
Mhm.
I will record myself doing it, and then what we'll do is we'll take it into, again, Make or any of those kinds of things, and then start doing a process map or a mind map on step one is this, step two is this, step three is this. We
Okay.
map that out, and then we kind of release it out to the automation.
Okay. And in what way is AI transforming SEO, and how are you incorporating into your strategies and automation as well?
AI has transformed everything that we do. One of the things I'll actually be speaking in 2 weeks in Las Vegas
Okay.
for SEO rock stars. And one of the things I'll be going over is how I use Google Sheets to automate that. We've actually pulled in OpenAI and Google Gemini into some of our sheets, Claude, Perplexity as well. And what we're doing is we're creating content and scheduling it at scale. And so you can use this for a variety of different techniques, tactics, things like that. But AI has changed the way that we do stuff by cutting down our, like, improving overall output by at least tenfold, while at the same time reducing our overall overhead and need to be involved probably inversely by at least tenfold. So we can get more done, less work. It's just everything that we're doing is enhanced through AI.
Okay. I mean, how do you leverage AI to enhance content strategies from creation to optimization, or you just run a prompt and boom?
So we've done a variety of different things as far as, like, and it all does come down to the prompt, right? If you have a good prompt, you're going to get decent output. I think the
Right.
problem that I see with a lot of people is just lacking the knowledge of what works with a prompt. Having a prompt that you're actually defining the voice that you're looking for, the overall purpose that you're looking for. We do a lot of stuff with that, like takes the voice of, say, Dan Kennedy or Russell Brunson or these guys that are really good copywriters. Another one of my favorites is Mike McAllowitz. Right. You can take a lot of those kinds of voice, and instead of just saying, write me 25 social posts about digital marketing, right? You can say, write it in the tone of Dan Kennedy, or write it in the tone of Mike McAllowitz or Donald Miller, StoryBrand, right? So these guys that are really humanizing the way that things work, or the approach to content, and you're going to get a much better output than you would just by saying, give me Facebook posts, right? So I think that a lot of it does come down to the way that your prompts are set up.
Okay.
And if you put in garbage, you're going to get out garbage. If you put in a decent prompt, you're going to get fantastic results.
Right. Now, so let's talk a little bit about advanced SEO strategy. I know you almost what you do is advanced, but still.
Right.
So what are some of the effective link building strategies you have used, and how do you measure their success?
So there are some link building strategies that I can talk about, and some that I'll say we'll bypass a little bit just because they are more aggressive.
Okay.
But content and content assets in general are probably one of the most important link building components that you can do. Again, like a lot of the stuff that we do, we build a lot of our own links. We don't necessarily do outreach. I don't think I've done outreach in
Okay.
but when we're building our assets, what we do is we build linkable things or things that can be lead magnets. A very practical example would be we use a tool that helps us create ebooks, right? Now, who wouldn't want an ebook, even for $1 is like a lead magnet that gives you actionable tips to optimize your Google business profile or to optimize your on-page strategies, right? These are all things that are great assets. And within the PDF, of course, we're going to link back to maybe potential blogs that we have or our YouTube channel showing, here's some different strategies on how to leverage this. It's all content that we're creating, but we're strategically interlinking this so it builds up not just our website, but our social content within our entire brand, and that asset can be leveraged in a variety of ways. Again, I can use it as a lead magnet or tripwire. We can use it for backlinking purposes. I can build more backlinks to it, right? Depending on what I'm looking at. And I can, if I have V2 of the book or V3 or something else, I can do that. We can also leverage email marketing with that as well and obtain backlinks through that method. There's a lot of different things that when you think creatively and outside of the box, there's a lot of different things that you can do. So,
Okay. Right.
as
Okay.
far as the advanced stuff,
Right.
you got to definitely hit me up at one of these events. And that's, again, the beauty of going to events like, say, you and I met out in Myrtle Beach at Legit Live. Those kind of events, there's a lot of other things that sitting around talking with people, you're going to get different tips and insights into different ways that people may or may not feel comfortable necessarily like just broadcasting out there, but it's going to be kind of the, conversations at the bar that, hey, I'm testing this. You might want to look into that. So,
right. I hear you. Right. Okay. Now, how important is EAT, which is of course experience, expertise, authoritiveness, and trustworthiness, factor in current SEO practices, and how do you optimize for it?
so for us, when we're looking at EEAT, it all comes back to brand, right? And how closely is your brand aligned with, and you'll hear, I'm sure that anyone that runs a summary on this, use AI summaries, right, guys? But anyone that's going to run a summary on this, you're going to hear brand, 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 brand. And that's absolutely huge. I know several people, and the guys that are actually crushing it in the industry right now, they're doing this and they're looking at those kinds of signals. So when it comes to EEAT, one of the things that we look at is how well is your brand known? How well is it established? Are you taking up all of those entity buckets? Are you being seen in SGE or AI summaries? And the way that we tend to do this is, number one, just good SEO, right? Good on page, you have to have that. You've also got to have you've got to have a decent backlink profile. You have to be seen as legitimate and authoritative in the space. One of the easiest ways that we're seeing EEAT work well for people is just staying on topic. So one of our strategies, and a very actionable one, I've talked at a couple conferences recently, is we use a 5-bucket system. Okay. And so the way that we do this is there are 5 things that define what a business, what they do, products, services, things like that. And so we tend to focus on those 5 things and then build continuous content around that. So, for example, my agency, we do website design and development. We do search engine optimization. We do paid media placement. Like PPC is such a dirty word. People don't like using it. So search engine marketing, or SEM, right? We'll call it that. We do cybersecurity. And then we also work with like brand strategy. So out of all of those particular components, one of what we'll do is we'll rotate through each one of them. So we might talk about brand strategy in one blog, and then we're going to go to maybe our SEO, talking about, how SEO can relate to brand strategy. We're going to talk about website design and development. We would have a sixth in there, social media, online marketing and brand strategy, things like that. But then we would talk about potentially the implications of securing your website and having things that are possibly watermarked or things like that, right? So we're going to rotate through each one of those 5 topics. And so it helps establish brand authority and brand trust because we have everything siloed and we're continuing to hit these topics over and over. In all honesty, that's how you build a lot of EEAT is you write about particular topics and write more extensively about those topics than any of the competition.
Okay. Now, what are your best practices for improving click-through rate, CTR, or search engines? And do you believe in CTR manipulation?
I was going to say that the last part of that's a little bit of a baited question there. CTR works. It does matter. Now, depending on CTR manipulation, you can go through automated means and methods. 100% that works. Google's gotten a lot smarter about it, though. So where a lot of people fail with it is not understanding the nuance of CTR manipulation. Let's be honest, though, you could do it a legitimate way and do it via ads. And this is why previously I'd mentioned, if you're not running ads, you're kind of doing it a disservice because ads are a fantastic way to increase CTR in very effective CTR, right? You can control geographic specificity on it. You can control your target market. There's a lot of other things that you can really dig into. And if you're doing it correctly, it's funny because I'm sure you've heard this as well, that like ads don't affect SEO, right? And I would say directly, they don't. Like just because you're running ads doesn't mean that you're going to have better SEO. However, and this is where it gets into a little bit of a nuanced response, the byproduct of someone clicking through to your website from an ad and how often and periodic that happens and how they're engaging with your website, without question, I've seen that affect the way that your website is seen and how it ranks. LSA ads, point in case with that. Like I've seen local businesses that run LSA ads, they get good traction on it. They're doing everything that they need to from a good ad strategy standpoint. Like it's everything that I would see through a manipulated CTR, like bot traffic, but legitimately, right? And so it 100%, like I see very, very strong correlation between like running ads and improved traffic and improved overall SEO and rankings.
Okay. That's a different outlook. I mean, a lot of people not talk about this, but I completely agree with that theory. Yes.
It's interesting because, again, like if you're running ads, you're increasing those signals to the website, and there's absolutely no reason why, you wouldn't see like improved rankings through stuff like that. So
right.
It's engagement.
Yes. CTR is engagement, right? Now let's talk a little bit about current trends and challenges in SEO. As we look at 2024, what are some key trends in SEO that agencies should be aware of, which will carry to 5?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I see, probably the biggest challenge for any agency right now, is the commoditization of SEO, right? And because of AI and because...
Hold for a sec, Powerful. Just
I was going to say, no, you're going black hat now, right?
We are back.
Going dark on it.
You were saying it's commoditized, right?
Well, I think that SEO in general is being commoditized. And because, I mean, even seeing these AI kind of optimization tools where it's like, we're going to optimize everything for you. Everyone's looking for push button. They're looking at reducing cost. They're looking at trying to reduce overall effort, right? And so I think the issue for a lot of agencies is going to be defining who they are and their position within the market, right? I think that's going to be a big challenge. I think the other big challenge is that I'm seeing Google's kind of at a stress point at this point. Right now, right? They're having a tough time indexing stuff. One of the things that, again, not a lot of people are talking about, but something I find really interesting is that they're trying to offload as much as they possibly can. One of the conferences I'd spoken at recently, they were talking about the actual cost for Google to operate its search engine functions, right? And you're talking in the billions of dollars for it to just operate, right? Keep the lights on and, just function day-to-day business as usual. And from a business owner standpoint, that's a big bill to pay and understand. I mean, so it makes sense why they would prioritize things like monetization, their ad revenue, things like that, because hey, that's what makes them money. Free search does nothing for them, right? Organic does nothing. So when you look at it through that lens, I think that it shifts the perspective of what Google is and why it functions the way it does. Understanding that they're a for-profit business, they have shareholders that they have to, answer to at the end of the day, and having a price tag that or an annual bill that comes in the billions of dollars. Like, I don't think that most people can even fathom having an expense like that, right?
Right.
And so I think that's the other thing that, with Google, the challenge is, okay, they've offloaded all of their cash into archive.org or the Wayback Machine, right? Google's not even going to handle cash anymore because it's too expensive. Hey, we can cut costs where we can. I'm also seeing interesting things going on with, again, social and the verifications that are involved with social, right? It elevates your level of trust. So if you have your blue check marks, again, you're going to have to pay for these kinds of things, but that elevates a level of trust where you may not have had that before, right? It establishes that, yes, there is an actual person behind this. It's not just some, fake profile that gets spun up, has zero trust signals in it. You're actually showing, yes, there's a person behind this particular profile, and you can corroborate that with online, like offline signals as well. So I think that for me is probably another big thing that I would look at from an agency standpoint, is understanding that Google is very utilitarian, and they're not going to do something that doesn't have a use case or make sense financially for them. I see this as in a lot of cases, especially with several agencies I've worked with over the past, they're like, well, Google should help us out. And it's like, Google doesn't care. They really don't. Really what they care about is it profitable for us? And just as like I was saying, as a business owner myself, or as you, if you were losing money on a particular venture, you'd probably stop that venture as much as you possibly can. The only reason why Google doesn't turn off search is because of the data that they can mine or harvest off of that.
Yeah.
In which in turn they can sell more ads and they can monetize more effectively and they can get their cut at the end of the day. And so I think that that's a really important thing for agencies and SEOs in general to understand, is that you have to think through, like, how does this relate to Google's overall profitability? And if it doesn't add to their bottom line, they're probably not going to do it.
I agree for most part of it. Of course, it's end of the day, it's Google. It's just profitability, which they look more.
They're a business. I mean, you can't fault them for that, right? Like they're in business to make money, just like the rest of us. And I don't see it as like they're going to do something benevolent or altruistic to just out of the goodness of their heart. Like, there's purpose behind everything that they do. And that purpose at the end of the day is to stay in business and be, the dominant search engine on the market.
Right.
So, and make money, right?
Of course. So let's talk a little bit about client management and agency growth. What are your most effective methods for generating leads in the digital marketing space?
So with digital marketing, again, it comes down to the assets that you're creating, promotion of those assets. I'm a big fan of the Pareto principle, so 80-20 rule. And in my opinion, 80% of it should come down to the promotion of your assets, whereas 20% is really the creation of them. So I've seen guys that are mediocre at best. And I'm sure we see this all the time in Facebook, right? You get nothing against young kids, but it's really, really hard for me to take someone seriously where they're like, I'm 18 years old, or I'm 21 years old. I'm crushing it. I'm a multimillionaire. And there are those guys out there. But the reason is because they're actually out there being social, putting their name out there. And, I've seen the same thing with like a lot of these private groups, be it School, Circle, Discord, all of these kinds of things where these guys are like, hey, come into my group and it's $20 a month, $100 a month, anything like that. They're making thousands on these things. And to be quite frank, a lot of them have either just gone through maybe a course and been like, okay, well, I'm going to adapt this. A lot of them it goes back to, maybe some of like, Dan Kennedy or, Alex Hermosi, stuff like this, where these guys are like, they have great concept. These kids learn some of this stuff and then they're actually out there promoting it. Do these kids actually know anything about running a multi-million-dollar agency? Probably not. But they're able to go out there and they're able to promote themselves and carry themselves as like, hey, look, we've done this. I do have to laugh a little bit, I'll be honest, with a lot of the social, like, hey, I've made all this money kind of stuff. A lot of times what I see is I make a course, say that I'm making all this money, you pay me to make a lot of money, and then I brag about how I made all the money. Right. And so it's kind of this weird cyclical kind of a thing that's like, but you made the money off of bragging about how you had money.
Right.
You may or may not have made a course, and now you actually have the money. So which one comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? To me, that's probably the biggest thing from agency growth is just being out there. Again, like a little bit of a tangent there, but if you're not out there actively pursuing marketing, you're going to get passed by guys that do.
Okay.
So,
All right. And what strategies have you find effective for scaling a small digital marketing agency?
scaling
Except
small digital
besides
marketing
that,
agencies. So one of the things that I would recommend for small digital marketing agencies, and especially if you're bootstrapped on
Mhm.
cash, is you can niche down. Obviously, niching down is going to be a really effective method to scale out. I would caution, be very careful about not taking on too many clients in a particular area because that can start getting into some ethical concerns if you're trying to rank more than one person in especially a very small market
Right.
for a specific vertical. However,
Right.
if you get known as the guy that does HVAC contractors or roofing clients in your area, you can build an entire brand based on that. Like we're the roofing guy, or we're the HVAC guy, or we're the med spa guy, right? That's a really effective way for smaller agencies to scale out. At some point, though, the caution I would have with that is that if you're only niched down into a single vertical, when things like COVID happened, I knew several guys that were just doing med spas or just doing dentists or, you know, LASIK type doctors and things like that. And they absolutely got destroyed when COVID happened. You need to think through what that diversity looks like to a certain extent, because if you are niched down, yes, it is easy to scale, but that can also be taken away overnight with something like COVID, right?
Right. Okay. So that's a good advice. Niche down, but not to something very specific, of course.
Yeah, niche down, but maybe have a couple niches, right? And again, if we're talking like med spa, you could have things like, massage and then possibly even like med spa,
Right.
products online. You're not stepping outside of that niche so drastically that you're doing like med spa and then like fintech, right? Very, very different markets.
Right. 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 Right.
But if you're doing med spa and med spa products or healthcare products, maybe you're doing like e-com and then you have like more of a traditional local site, that can really help out. And potentially you can also, cross-link. Like if you're creating good content, and this is where, so a lot of people get really freaked out about things like PBNs. We're going to go off on a little unscripted here, but we'll talk a little bit about this. A lot of people get really weirded out about things like PBNs. What's interesting in my opinion, in my experience, is that a lot of these guys that are doing like guest post placement or strategic placement, be it whatever you want to call it, niche edits, guest posting, sponsored placement, any of this stuff, they actually own the website. And so I've talked with several even link building agencies that are like, we have, what's the word that they use? Inventory, right? Our inventory has grown. We have these strategic, partners that allow us to, we can talk to, and it's like, hey, we have a med spa company or we have an HVAC company, what can page one traffic do for us, right? And so what's interesting with that is a lot of these companies that have those kinds of like inventory or that can do this kind of outreach, they either have the site or they have connections to a site owner. Now, the difference between a crappy PBN that's just used for link building or a webmaster is the care and effort that you put into the website. You could 100% own 500 websites, and if you didn't care about them, you're just spinning them up for backlinks, you're going to get labeled. Did my camera just die?
Yes.
My goodness. I don't know what happened there.
You are back.
Okay.
We'll add it.
So as soon as I start talking about PBNs and stuff,
Yeah.
like I'm surprised the mute button didn't come on. But so the thing is that you can have 500 websites, and if you're just spinning them up for the purposes of like link building, you're going to get labeled as a PBN dirty spammer, right? If you had 500 websites and they're you actually took a little bit of time to curate content, create the content, make them look good, you're no longer a dirty spammer, you're a webmaster. You just happen to own 500 websites that, if one of your clients then wanted to go in and write content or needed placement on these things using the idea of a med spa, and then also like maybe healthcare products or maybe, gut health products or things like that, you can place that on these other websites. It just, do it with caution and don't do it, obviously don't go out there and just like saying, hey, this is my entire network of websites, right? But at the end of the day, most of these guys who are selling links, that's exactly what their strategy is. They just happen to own a lot of websites that then, if, when you're doing guest posting, it's like, okay, yeah, well, you can pay me and I'll put it on one of the hundreds of websites that I own.
Right.
Which at the end of the day, like if you really want to boil it down to it, is a PBN. Or, maybe not a private blog network, but a public blog network or inventory, as we're calling it, right? So I think that's just a really important thing for a lot of people to understand. And again, why we don't typically pay for links or we don't like do outreach or any of that. We actually will go out and we actually build our own links.
That's how exactly we also do, because I think honestly what you says is it's a public PBN, it's a private PBN. That's the only difference. You don't know. At least the one you have better control and quality and everything, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's at the end of the day, I think that's even what Google looks at. I did a link analysis on a company that had posted some stuff on like Forbes or, Inc. or some of these other really big types of sites. And what was interesting is when I actually started looking at the backlink analysis for these kinds of things, it was very interesting to see that kind of like very similar type of pattern that I would see with just like your typical syndication, pushing it out to other blogs that you may or may not have control of, right? You probably do have control of, but then picking it up, and because you'll see these sites that are like, oh, we're just going to put like a single paragraph excerpt. By the way, if you want to read this, go back to, to said website. And it's all about that control, right? And if you have quality standards in place, again, you're a webmaster, you're not a dirty PBN spammer.
Right. Now, what's your take on in-house SEO team versus outsourcing SEO services?
So we use both. My in-house team is about 5 people, and we white label for several other agencies. We do a lot of other stuff. My in-house team is only about 5 people, and it's pretty lean team, but each one of them is an expert in their own right. So we do that. And then as we need to scale or as we need additional things, I may go to things like Legit, or I may go and outsource particular components of it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that does come into our quality control standards. And if a subcontractor or any kind of outsourced deliverable does not meet our quality standards, ultimately that comes back to us, right? And so at the end of the day, I don't see any issue with outsourcing stuff as long as quality control measures are in place.
Right.
And that you're not just outsourcing it to outsource it, right? Okay. If you have those quality metrics in place and you can establish like, this is what our metrics are. If it doesn't meet that standard, it's rejected and not good. And then again, obviously, like if you're testing out any kind of outsourcing, don't do it immediately on a client site, right? This goes back into those test sites that you may have. If you're testing someone out that's an outsourcer, put them on one of your test sites, see what they can do with that. because again, you're not dealing with client stuff that could mean
Right.
make the difference between them putting food on their family's table or, you know, like shutting down.
Right.
So that's one of my pieces of advice for any agency is like
Okay.
test your outsourcers before you actually put them on active projects, please.
Absolutely. And what strategies have been effective for you in attracting and especially retaining clients?
So the biggest thing is setting expectations. And I think that that's where a lot of agencies, when they do have a high churn, there's a lack of expectation setting for their clients. So what ends up happening is they'll promise the world, or their sales team will promise the world. And then when it actually comes to deliverables, that's lackluster. And that's where they fall short. I think that establishing realistic goals and expectations are absolutely critical to the success and retention of clients.
Okay. And how can agencies differentiate themselves in such a crowded market? I know you said niche down, but are there any other ways also to differentiate?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it comes down to your creativity, right? If you're offering the same thing, I'm also a big fan of blue ocean strategies, right? If you're doing everything that everyone else is doing, it's going to be really tough to stick out in front of your target market or target audience. If you have something that's disruptive, you're going to stick out a lot more. And it doesn't necessarily need to be controversial, but this is where I think that having a particular market strategy or voice within the market really is effective. There was a online webinar I attended recently that I thought they put this really eloquently. But basically what it was is like even if you look at different superheroes or different people like that, right? There's different approaches to say Batman versus Superman, right?
Okay.
They're both superheroes, but their
Right.
approach in how they do things is vastly different, right?
Okay.
And understanding that I think, is where agencies, if they really want to stand out, establishing who you are, and that goes back into the who you are, what you do, where you do it, right? But what's your brand voice? Are you, Superman who's all about, freedom and that kind of stuff, or are you about Batman who's going to solve your problems with your fists, right? I mean,
Okay.
again, they're both superheroes, but they handle things in a very different manner
Right.
that you know that can separate you from your competition quite dramatically. And it's nuanced, but it's just it will help craft your voice as an agency.
Okay. And so for those just starting out in SEO with limited resources,
Yeah.
what advice would you give?
The advice that I would give is learn as much as you can. Don't be afraid to fail. And again, fail in a very safe place. Don't do it on clients. Please, for the love of God, don't do it on clients. Have a test site. I mean, a test site is going to cost you a little bit of money. Well, not even that. I mean, shoot, you could even fire up a Google site. You could fire up a free Weebly or Wix site. Learn your basics on that. Try and rank something. And I see a lot of guys that just want to immediately jump into let's get paid on stuff. And that's great. It's effective, but like if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to have to start somewhere. Just watching, videos on stuff, watching YouTube University, right? Those kinds of things that'll get you so far, but without practical application, you're going to be very limited. So that would be my advice. Like fire up a Google site, fire up a free Weebly or Wix or anything like that. Try and rank it, right? You are going to run into some significant challenges, right? Without having an actual domain, without having something that
Right.
is seen as a bit more legitimate. You will run into challenges. However, you're going to learn a lot in that process. The other thing that I would also recommend is don't be afraid of these labels like necessarily white hat, black hat, purple hat, whatever. Understand what they are and understand that it's about risk. And at the end of the day, I think that's what it is. I have some pretty unpopular opinions about some of this stuff, but at the end of the day, I think what matters is that you can do something and is it high risk, high reward, low risk, high reward, high risk, high reward, or high risk, low reward.
Okay.
You want to understand like what do each of these things, whatever the tactic is that you're doing, CTR manipulation can be super, super advantageous to do, but it's also a high risk, high reward thing. If you screw it up, you're going to bury a website. That's not something I necessarily would want to do to a client.
Right.
Now, things like blogging, relatively low risk, medium to high risk, or medium to high reward, we'll say. So low risk, medium to high reward, depending on what the blog is, right? Depending on link building strategies. It could be, moderate risk to moderate to high reward on that. Just depends. And so I think that if you're just starting out and you're bootstrapped on cash, understanding what these things are and listen to both sides of things. Don't get so entrenched in we're all about this one strategy. Take in a bunch of strategies, then determine what makes sense for you.
Okay. Right. I think that makes more sense rather than just trying to have just one strategy and trying to copy some of the strategy. I think it
totally
best and what works for you and try to do multiple tests.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the thing that I tend to see though too is like, so my background initially when I came from it was from like after I did development and I actually did reputation. I still do a lot of reputation management, but the thing is that when people were just like, oh, content is king and all you need is content, that is true. Content does matter. However, without links, content is kind of like having that proverbial Lamborghini that all of us talk about in the SEO industry, right? It's like having the Lambo in your front yard or in your driveway, but no gas or no petroleum, right? It's great. You can take some awesome Instagram photos. You can be like, look at my content. It's so awesome. Look at this Lambo. It's so awesome, right? But it's not going to go anywhere. On the flip side of that, if all you're doing is link building, then you have a big, 5-gallon thing or, big container of gasoline, but no car. What could you do? You could do all kinds of stuff with it. I mean, you could light it on fire. You could do whatever, right? But without something to actually use it with, you just have gasoline. Combine the two of them. Now we're driving down the road going pretty fast, pretty far, right? But you have to understand that. And that's, I think, where I see the biggest difference between like white and black hat is like people will be like, white hat, you've got to just do content. But without link building, you're not going to go anywhere. On the flip side of it, link building without good content, you're not going to get the conversion. You're not going to get the traffic. It's pointless effort because you'll have to do more link building. You still don't get the traffic, or it's going to be pushing, trying to push things in opposition of gravity. And you're going to have to push harder and harder and harder, and you're still not going to get the results that you're looking for. So it's got to be a combination of both.
Okay. Looking ahead, what do you see as the future direction of SEO and digital marketing?
Because again, like as we mentioned earlier, I think it really will it'll come down to being a brand strategist and building the entire marketing funnel for clients, not just focusing on SEO. I think that for SEO, it's going to come down to more or less brand positioning, because all of the good SEO tactics and techniques that we use, that's how you're going to get into SGE. It's how you get the rich snippets. It's how you get a lot of these other components that Google's putting in. But so I think that that's where SEO lies, is that it's going to be in positioning these websites or positioning these brands so that they do appear in those kinds of position in things like SGE. But let's not rely on SEO to appear like in the 10 blue links that we have, right? It's all about positioning it so that you're somewhere within that Google screen.
Right. I completely agree with you. Now, what final thought or key takeaways would you like to share with our listeners?
So, big key takeaway is don't be afraid, test and don't be afraid to fail.
Right. Okay, that absolutely. And always think like a brand and don't just stick to one specific niche. Be ready to diversify. Right.
Don't be afraid to fail.
Yes, Brian, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and thank you for sharing your insights and experience with us. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners follow your work or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Facebook. You can follow me. My handle on that is Kato Kato.Brian, so Kato.Brian. I used to be pretty active on Twitter, not so much anymore, but you can still follow me there. I still reply and do all of that on message. And that is Kato B Kato. So last name, first initial, last name. And then also on Instagram or like I said, any of the meta platforms. So those are typically the best places to get in touch with me. You can also check out my website, which is fusionvine.com. You can also find me on my personal website, which is briankato.com. So any one of those, you're good to go.
Okay. And thank you again, Brian, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the Agency Insider podcast for more insightful conversations. Until next time, thank you.